man regiment, just back. First man regiment, just back. Steady. Second man, just back. Steady. Stand still. Now front up. First man, fire, just back. Run it on. Steady. Second man, just back. Third man, just back. Steady. Stand still. Now you're on. F up. Fourth man, regiment, just back. Fourth man, just back. Steady. Fifth man, just back. Steady. First man, prison, just back. Steady. Stand still. Now you're on. Right up. Right on front.
Right up. Stand up. Yes. Right up. All right. Shut.
Rider! Stand is! Stand is it? Rider! All right! Shut!
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. I, Martin Keith Roper, Governor of the Cayman Islands, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless his Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at Government House, Grand Cayman, this 11th day of September, in the year of our Lord, 2022.
Rider! Forward! Shoulder! Arms! Rider! Royal salute! Present! Arms!
God save the King.
God save the King! Shoulder! Arms! Rider! Royal salute! Present! Arms!
Send him victorious, happy and
Shoulder! Arms! Order! Arms! Right will remove address! Remove address!
we will now give 3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip,
Right!
hip hip,
Right!
hip hip.
Right! Right will replace address! Replace address! Right! Shun! Right! In close order! Inwards! Dress! Eyes straight! Shoulder! Arms! Right will march past in column of route. Police contingent leading. Move to the right in files. Right! Turn! March! Right! Police attention! Arms! Drop!
As you've seen, no enmity on other sides. We've seen of Scotland taking her own part in the accession. Because she's such a good woman, because everything that we've seen about her service and her duty and all the things that we talk about, her humour, her ability to put people at their ease, her ability to reach out to people, it's just so thoroughly kind of wholesome. But it's also reminded people of the fact that it's been a tough few years, that we've all lost people, and this national mourning has reopened for many people a lot of wounds in their own personal life and their own personal mourning. And I think the way I would sum up this week is that it's brought out the best of us in the saddest of times.
Ruth Davidson, we much appreciate you joining us here. Thank you very much indeed. Alistair.
Watching the hearse now making its way a little further south towards Edinburgh and skirting around by the town of Dron and heading down towards Kinross. This is one of the main arterial roads of the east coast of Scotland, and it will deliver the Queen and this procession to enormous crowds as they wait on bridges or stop cars on the way, and the chance for anyone who wishes to, as the Queen is carried towards the capital city of Edinburgh, a chance to stop and look and take part in this moment. And many of the people who our reporters have spoken to along this route have had a chance to say why they came, what the Queen meant to them, the fact of her constancy and presence in national and world life. The number of presidents she met in the United States, for that lady who was on board the yacht, for instance, and was there having tea, just as the Queen, when she was on board the yacht, would have had tea every day at 5 o'clock, and heard that the Queen was unwell, and it led, of course, to the Queen's demise, and she changed her holiday plans. Everybody deals with news of this gravity to the life of somebody who has served and become known around the world in different ways. One of the roles of the Crown is to, as I often feel, is sometimes to give people an institution about which they can complain or be angry, or is there to earth the sentiments of anguish in a nation. The Queen certainly did that after the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, and managed it with the eloquence and care of somebody who I think always knew the national mood better than most of those who advised her. But her turn is over, and the King will take on that responsibility, having watched so much as the palace now.
Gemma, add some. So back to Buckingham Palace then, let's just take a look at the pictures there. Looks like the Queen Consort is waving to the crowds, the thousands of people who have come to pay their respects. She, of course, has accompanied her husband, King Charles III, on many already of the occasions that we have seen him. The walkabout, first of all, the Accession Council too, but returning it appears to Buckingham Palace, as you can see. And the crowds are cheering, applauding, the flags waving too, as Camilla, Queen Consort, arrives back. Well, let's remind ourselves of pictures from a little earlier today. Farmers in Aberdeenshire lined their tractors along the road as a mark of respect as the Queen's coffin made its way along the road. One of those who joined in with her family, Grace Noble, who joined those Aberdeenshire farmers, as you can see, almost 50 tractors lined up together in a guard of honour for the Queen's cortege. Well, I'm pleased to say that Grace Noble joins me now, owner of Aberdeenshire Highland Cattle. And Grace, everybody, all the politicians I've spoken to today have picked up on your idea to line the tractors up. Who came up with the idea and why did you think of it?
Yeah, it wasn't actually myself that came up with the idea. It was one of my farming neighbours, Rodney Blackhall, who came up with the idea and rallied round all the neighbouring farming community to come along. We all attended a park on the route, which is tenanted by Alan Beaton of the Lays Estate, and that's where all the families congregated with their tractors to mark respect to a very special lady.
And how did you feel when the cortege passed?
It was very important to be a part, and it really brought the mood and the feeling for the whole community and the whole country, and in particular Royal Deeside. Living here, we've got very strong connections with the royal family and what they bring to the community and the economy as well here. So it was very important to pay tribute to the Queen and her service and the family at this time.
And she used to, of course, spend so much time walking in the hills, the fields, enjoying the River Dee. Were you amongst those people that, you know, caught a glimpse of her every now and then as she enjoyed her summer break in Balmoral?
Well, I didn't actually catch a glimpse of her, but being a farmer of Highland cattle, I have done business with her in the past, buying cattle from her, Highland cattle, every year from her estate at Balmoral. So we certainly have a connection there. And in COVID times as well, we had interest from the Duke of Rothesay, who invited myself to Burke Hall for morning coffee, which was a real boost to people like myself and other producers that he also invited when we were going through challenging times. So it just shows how supporting they are and whatever way they can to farming and business in the region, which is just shows, you know, it's just remarkable.
And give your tribute now while we have you on. You know, how would you like to remember Her Majesty?
Really fondly, you know, a woman that was very passionate about Scotland and the rural community. You could clearly see that was her passion. You know, horses and the countryside and the rural living, which I think is lovely to think that was such a privilege and what she enjoyed being up here and choosing to spend her annual holiday here in Scotland. It's just really lovely and to feel connected. I also fondly remember when she used to sail in the Royal Yacht Britannia. I grew up on the Isle of Raasay next to the Isle of Skye, so we were used to seeing the Royal Yacht Britannia pass by our islands in our summer holidays, and thinking, wow, how special it was that she chose to come up to Scotland for our holidays with her family and make special memories for herself and her family.
Absolutely, yes. None of the foreign holidays or the Caribbean island beloved by her sister. For her, it was certainly a British holiday that she much preferred, was it not? Grace Noble, owner of Aberdeenshire Highland Cattle, one of those farmers, almost 50 tractors who lined up together facing the road on the side of the fields there as the Queen's cortege passed. Let's head now to Mark Austin.
Anna, thank you very much indeed. And wonderful stories emerging of farmers lining up their tractors, all sorts of people coming out, all ages. I'm joined now by the Royal Press Secretary, former Royal Press Secretary, Patrick Harrison. And Patrick, these have been just wonderful images.
Fantastic images, and another very poignant day, Mark. I think the moment when we saw the Queen's coffin for the first time this morning was another of those incredibly emotional moments that we've had over the past few days and will continue to have.
Yeah, and the people there on the flyovers, it just shows the affection in which she was held.
Absolutely, and you know, really important that everybody has an opportunity to express that emotion and to reflect on a wonderful reign where she was quite simply our guiding light for generations.
And all the planning that has taken place, that'll be all done, will it? I mean, you've worked
Yes.
for 14 years inside these palaces, down to the finest detail, no doubt. Give us a sense of the kind of planning. I mean, it's years
of planning and meticulous planning. These 10 days, it's the balance of ceremonial but also personal and public, and getting that balance right. I remember working on the plans, gosh, 10, 20 years ago, and they would have evolved over time. And I think we've seen in the proclamations today as well, the ceremonial aspect, but also an opportunity for people in Cardiff and Belfast and Edinburgh to be part of this as well. And of course, crowds here at Buckingham Palace and at Windsor Castle laying flowers. So lots of different moments of interaction for the public, which is an important part of this.
And you worked for the then Prince of Wales, now King Charles, for quite some time. Just give us a sense of what it was like to work for him.
Well, I've never worked for a more committed and dedicated and hardworking human being. Very, very passionate, very committed, as we know, to his causes and his initiatives, but also a great sense of public duty. He has already served 50 years in public life, and he takes that sense of public duty with him. But I think also a compassionate side to him as well. I witnessed when we did things away from the cameras, so visits to children's hospices or visiting the injured and that sort of thing, where the compassionate side of his personality came through. And I think we'll see that more in this unifying role as king.
Yes, and we just saw a few moments ago Camilla leaving Buckingham Palace and I think going to Clarence House. We have a picture as well, I think, of King Charles on his way from Clarence House to Buckingham Palace to meet Commonwealth leaders and high commissioners from the Commonwealth. He is straight down to business.
Absolutely, and we saw that with the first time that he received the Prime Minister. And now, of course, these meetings as well. And that is a key part of these 10 days as well, these first crucial meetings. And the fact that he's meeting the High Commissioners today shows the importance of that relationship.
And times change. It was clear and quite interesting that the Queen didn't do interviews. She never gave interviews. You worked on the press side for a long time. So do you expect the King to give interviews as monarch? He's obviously given several as the Prince of Wales. Do you expect him to give interviews as the monarch?
Well, I wouldn't rule that out, but the focus at the moment is on these first 10 days. And of course, we've already seen that personal touch in that very heartfelt address that he gave, which was absolutely the man I knew, and very much a speech that he would have written himself. And again, got that wonderful balance between public tribute to not only his mother, but other members of the family, and then that recommitment to public service. But yes, and we saw the walkabout that he did here on that first day as well. So I think we will see perhaps a little bit more of that personal touch come through as he's king. But as I say, the focus at the moment is leading the nation in remembrance of the late Queen over these 10 days.
And many people would say at the moment, he hasn't really put a foot wrong.
Absolutely. Many people have said pitch perfect, and I would absolutely agree with that. It's a grueling schedule, and there's a lot that's going on over the next 10 days for both him and the Queen Consort.
Yes.
But so far, I think they've done brilliantly.
It is a grueling schedule. Off to Scotland clearly tomorrow, and then Northern Ireland, subsequently Wales.
Yes.
And, it is a very busy schedule. You say that he will have learnt from his mother, and of course he will. He had many, many years watching and listening and looking at how she did the job. But it will inevitably be a different style and a different monarchy.
It will inevitably be a little bit different because he's a different personality. But there will be an awful lot that is the same as well. That sense of public duty, which he not only inherited from his mother, but he's been around it all his life. And as I say, he has spent already 50 years in public service. And don't forget, he's already been doing quite a lot of those head of state roles when the Queen was still alive. So investitures, state opening of Parliament, Commonwealth heads of government in Rwanda. So he's already done quite a lot of those roles already.
A slimmed down monarchy, that will happen, do you think? I mean, it is happening, clearly, but that is something that he would want.
I think that's something that will be considered, but I think that's in the on the to-do list for a bit further on beyond these initial days.
And from a press secretary point of view, those pictures yesterday of William and Harry coming out together. Was that a good idea, do you think?
Yeah, I do. I think it was fantastic. And I think the King set the tone there by referencing his love for both his sons in that address. And I think that was very deliberate. And I think it was fantastic to see both of them with their wives doing that walkabout at Windsor yesterday. This is a moment to come together. The King is leading the nation in mourning, leading the nation in remembering the late Queen. And he talked about the family of nations. He's leading the family of nations, but he's also leading his own family as well.
Patrick, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back up to Scotland and join Anna.
Yes, we are watching the funeral cortege make its way towards the Scottish capital, Edinburgh. Not much longer to go, in fact, for that. And the crowds already gathered on the Royal Mile. They were there earlier today too for the proclamation of King Charles III, and certainly they will be waiting to see the Queen's cortege go round Edinburgh Castle, down the Royal Mile, arriving here at the Palace of Holyrood House. Well, let's bring in now the Very Reverend Dr. Laura Hood, former moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland and former chaplain to the Queen. And these are important moments, are they not? History being made, time for people to pay their respects and their own tributes to Her Majesty the Queen.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the streets are just absolutely lined. I had a text message from my son and my daughter, one's in Aberdeen, one's in Dundee, and they were already going out and they said the place is just mobbed round about here. People just waiting and watching. And it's history. It's history passing you on its way.
Well, it really is, isn't it? And it's something we've not witnessed for decades and decades. And most people alive in this country will not have remembered an occasion like this. But let's talk about the Queen's faith. We know it was sincerely held and very strong. How will she feel now, do you think? Or how would she have felt about, the moment of her passing? What would her thoughts have been at this point?
I think she'll be very humbled at all the people who are out there, who are there to see her going past, to see her remains going past. Because of her Christian faith, then she would have that knowledge, that understanding that she was going home, very much going home into the arms of her loving father who's been with her all her life, because her faith was very much part of her DNA. It's difficult to separate her faith and the Queen. They're one and the same thing. There's a lovely prayer that's been put up in the Church of Scotland website and resources, and it says that in your life, she shaped her life. Under your sovereignty, she fashioned her reign. in your loving heart she found wisdom and peace. And I think that sums it up. That was the guiding spirit of her life, the guiding spirit that gave her that strength, that compassion, and that assurance that what she was doing, that she was queen, not because of some constitutional way, but she was queen by the grace of God.
Well, the present, the current moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, the Right Reverend Dr. Ian Greenshills, was invited to stay with the Queen at Balmoral Castle only last weekend after being invited to hold a sermon at the church where Her Majesty worshipped while in Scotland. He said that he asked her what her favourite hymn was over lunch, but she refused to say and instead told him, "If I told you that, then that would be the hymn that everybody would think they had to have at a service." And then she just smiled and never divulged it. And he said that even at that time, she was reflecting on the afterlife with him and was in quite a contemplative state.
Yes, I mean, when you get to 96, I think that does tend to focus your mind a wee bit. Because in 96 she would be thinking of all that she had accomplished and all that she had done and working up until the end. And working up until the end because she didn't look on it as a job which she took up at a certain time and then retired from and laid down. She took it as something she had been called upon to do, and it wasn't hers. She'd been given that. It wasn't hers to lay down. It would only be laying down when she was called home to our Heavenly Father. And that's one of the joys of moderators and ministers in the Church of Scotland, royal chaplains, that you are invited to Balmoral and you spend the weekend with the Queen and the royal family who are there at that time. So you get that intimate detail and the discussions that you have with her, very intimate discussions. And you realise that her faith was so much part of her life. It was her life. And it was part of that DNA of her makeup.
And her humour was clear to see too. He also revealed she would make jokes and recalled, "It was funny, I was staying in what was called the Tower Suite. And what did the Queen say to me? That she was sending me to the Tower." So she was still very much finding that sense of humour, which no doubt you saw when you were chaplain to her. What are your fondest memories, if I can call them that, of the Queen?
Yes, and the humour side of things, I was being driven by the Queen to the barbecue out in one of the lodges, and so there you are. And first of all, you're thinking, I'm sitting in this Lando, and the Queen is driving me. So she had just got a new car. So we were driving these very dark roads up to the barbecue, and let's just say that the Queen, she didn't dawdle when she was driving. So we're going through, and suddenly a deer came out of the bushes in front of us, and she very quickly braked, swerved, etc. And I said, "Oh, well done, ma'am." And she said, "Yes, it wouldn't do to have the moderator in a ditch, would it?" I said, "No, quite true."
Oh, that's not. You're not the first person to say that she drove quickly.
Okay. So, and in another occasion, I had been speaking at a big guild event before I was up at Balmoral, and I'd made some comment, shall I say, about position of women in the church and sometimes how that wasn't accepted by various people, and it made the Sunday papers the next morning. So when we came back in from church, and she was flicking through the papers, I think in purpose, and she just turned around and she said, "Making the Sundays, I see, moderator." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She went, twinkle in her eye. And then later on we discussed it. And she was very, very supportive of what I'd been saying, etc. But yes, there's just always that twinkle in her eye, that sense of very, very quick-witted humour. And very often seeing her and Prince Philip vying with one another, the humour was it was a privilege to be there and to witness it.
Well, from what you're saying, they made the experience fun for you, didn't they? But returning to what King Charles said in his national address, as we look to the moment when she arrives in Edinburgh, He said, I know that her death brings great sadness to so many of you, and I share that sense of loss beyond measure with you all. In a little over a week's time, we will come together as a nation, as a commonwealth, and indeed a global community to lay my beloved mother to rest. In our sorrow, he said, let us remember and draw strength from the light of her example. What for you was that example that she said?
That sense of duty, that sense of realization that she was there for a purpose, that she'd been called by God. But alongside that, her example, her compassion, her forgiveness were also very much there. But just the simple fact that she realized who she was, she realized whom she was serving, and she did it to the very, very best of her ability. 96 and still carrying out her duties and carrying them out with a smile. And another moderator emailed me just a very short time ago, and he was a past moderator, Lord Wallace, in fact, and he said he'd been there a couple of weeks ago, and although she was frail, her brain was still razor sharp, and she was still so interested in what was happening in the Kirk, what was happening in the country at large. But just all that she was, and the faith that she proclaimed, and the faith that she lived out, because it wasn't just in words, it was what she was, and that will always remain with me.
Well, I think it was Queen Mary who said, we are royals, we never get tired, and we love hospitals. Did you ever see any sign of tiredness, or was it like, the Duke of Edinburgh, packing the day and living life to the full, as people describe?
Aware of any times when she showed that she was bored with anything, or it must have been, if you think about it, one of the things I said to people this morning, imagine every weekend you go your holidays, but every weekend you've got guests. You never have that kind of time off. One of the ladies in waiting told me that when she had gone to United States, to New York after 9/11, and it was to pay tribute to the British people who had lost their lives in that setting. And she said she was only supposed to be there for a certain amount of time because the weather was so hot and so humid, but she was just determined that there was absolutely no way that she wasn't spending the time. And she spent much longer than she should have done because she wanted to show that she cared. And she, except the heat and everything else, when everyone else was flagging round about her, she was carrying on because it meant so much. And she had that ability when she was speaking to someone to make them feel that they were important, and they were important in her life.
Well determined, resolute, steadfast, and carrying on, as you said. Very Reverend Dr. Lorna Hood, thank you very much indeed for joining us as we see the Queen's Ferry crossing there in the distance, Alistair.
Yes, and the Queen is coming close now to leaving the Kingdom of Fife. And to the right of her cortege at the moment is the city of Dunfermline, where Dunfermline Abbey, the resting place of King Robert the Bruce, an abbey founded by a famous Scottish queen called St. Margaret, who was an English princess who married the King of Scots. And we passed a little earlier the Loch Leven, where a very unhappy Queen of Scots, Mary Queen of Scots, was kept prisoner. And it has been through that history of Scotland that the Queen has been passing as she approaches now the Queen's Ferry crossing. And the Queen's Ferry crossing is where St. Margaret used to have the boat that crossed to get her from one side to the other. And it was opened by the Queen not all that long ago. And it is one of the three great crossings of the Firth of Forth. And once Her Majesty crosses from the Kingdom of Fife, it's a short distance then to her capital city of Edinburgh. And you see the great rail bridge on the left and the endless view that it's a bridge that once you finish painting it, you have to start again. And then in the middle, the first of the road bridges, which the Queen opened at an early point of her reign, and with the pressure of the requirements of traffic, the great Queen's Ferry crossing, which Her Majesty will be conveyed across shortly. And as we go in to see that moment, we know that she's being followed in the car behind by the Princess Royal. And she is accompanied by her husband, Sir Tim Lawrence. We saw a photograph of the Princess Royal as she left Balmoral earlier today with the Queen at the start of this journey. And in that photograph, we saw the face of a daughter who was accompanying her mother on this journey and crossing that amazing bridge now. Again, traffic stopping, people gathering to watch this moment, and on the bridge perhaps too, people witnessing as she crosses away from the Kingdom of Fife. The traffic on the bridge, on the northerly lane, pretty much at a standstill to witness the Queen dominate the southbound avenues. And in the background, the Royal Dockyard of Rosyth, and looking into the Firth as it winds its way up into the heart of Scotland, this great wide firth of water, bringing us now to the Central Valley of Scotland, which at this end is dominated by the capital city of Edinburgh. And also a little further out to sea from this great bridge is where the Royal Yacht Britannia has been tied up alongside in Leith. So many memories that the Queen had. The Royal Yacht Britannia was designed and planned in the reign of her father, King George VI, to replace the Royal Yacht that the Queen would have remembered as a child and used before the war, which was the Victoria and Albert No. 3. But sadly, the King died, and it was for the Queen and Prince Philip to design the Royal Yacht Britannia. Nobody knew what it was going to be called, and when she gave it its name at its launching over on the other side of Scotland, in Clydebank, there was a great cheer when she said, "I name this ship Britannia." And God bless all who sail in her. And the Queen and Prince Philip travelled across the world. She is the most travelled of monarchs in our history, but perhaps no surprise after 70 years as our Queen. But once asked about the Royal Yacht and its decommissioning, she said if she had a choice, she'd love to just have it driven into a beach and live on it as just herself and not as Queen, perhaps, for the rest of her life. She loved it so much. One of the great ships to be built in Scotland, and still one of the most beautiful. The crowd's really forming here on these crossings and following the journey into Edinburgh itself. There's a point here where the roads will divide and the Queen's journey will then follow towards Edinburgh specifically. But look at the traffic on the other sides. If it's moving, it's crawling, as the awareness of this cortege has passed around and people seeing the blue flashing lights of the outriders at the head of the procession will alert people the late Queen is coming. The Queen came to Edinburgh in 1953, soon after she was crowned, and in St Giles High Kirk, where she will lie in state from tomorrow, she was presented the Honours 3 of Scotland, which were the crown, the sceptre, and the sword, as we've temporarily lost pictures. It might be interesting to see where they're waiting now for the Queen's cortege to arrive. But she was presented the crown and took it from the Duke of Hamilton at the time. And it was quite heavy, and it was interesting if you see the film, how she almost had to struggle to hold it. This young 26-year-old woman, as she then was, who'd recently been crowned Queen of the United Kingdom. It'll be a bit of time before the Queen arrives at this spot, but clearly we just lost the shots there from the helicopter. But returning to it now, it's perhaps worth remembering that the Queen is being accompanied on this journey by her daughter, the Princess Royal. And we have a photograph of Her Royal Highness and Sir Tim Lawrence, who were seen as they left Balmoral on that very somber journey, a daughter accompanying her mother from the home of their family in the Highlands. And she's still in the car immediately behind the Queen as that cortege approaches the capital city and the Palace of Holyrood House. Crossing the Cramond Brig, there's a special tradition that goes back to one of the early King Jameses of Scotland, who liked to walk amongst his people unrecognized, but he fell amongst brigands who beat him up, and a farmer heard that somebody was in distress and came and chased off the brigands, had no idea that it was his king, and washed the king's wounds. Still not knowing who this person was, the farmer was asked what he most wanted, and he said he'd love to own the farm where he was working. And the man said, well, why don't you come and visit me? I'm going to be at the palace in Edinburgh. And so the family went down and they went in, and they had asked, how will we recognize you? And he said, oh, well, you'll see me because I'm going to be wearing a hat. And when they arrived, they were told only the king wears a hat. And they went in and they met the king. And the king gave the farmer his land on condition that once a reign, his descendants would wash the monarch's hands. And I met Mr. Huiston Crawford, who, as a young man of 10, had married King George VI's hands once. And then when he had the opportunity, he washed the young Queen's hands when she became sovereign. And I'm sure it'll be his grandson who will shortly be invited to carry out that tradition and wash the hands of the new King of Scots, Charles III.
Well, Alistair, you clearly know the castle here as governor of the castle. With me now is Louise Tate, the Queen's press secretary for Scotland for 15 years, and your office was at the palace, so you know the palace so well. And the
Mhm.
Royal Mile falls between the two, does it not?
It
Which
does.
this cortege will drive down. But talk us through what will happen at the palace, and much of what will happen there tonight will be to allow staff to pay their respects.
It will be that personal moment. The coffin will rest in the throne room, and at some point, members of staff will be able to pay their respects. And a moment of high emotion, I am sure, for them. Clearly, we all knew this was coming, but it is a real shock. And Holyrood House is not a big palace. It was the smallest of Her Majesty's official residences. But it was somewhere that she enjoyed very much spending time. And the garden parties that are hosted for over 8,000 people, incredible how she was able to meet so many people right up until obviously the pandemic.
Including for those who were members of the Order of the Thistle, the highest order of chivalry in Scotland.
The Thistle Knights and the Thistle Lady Knights. Yes, that is the highest order of chivalry. It comes after the Garter in terms of rank.
And explain how the layout of the palace is. The oldest part is at the back, is it? And
Well, the oldest part
parts
is on the north side, which is the Abbey, and that dates back to the 12th century. Then there's the tower, which was, I think I'm right in saying, was built by Mary Queen of Scots' father, James IV. I hope that's not wrong. My Royal Collection colleagues will be shouting at me. But then the other side of this east or south side of the palace is much newer. I think it dates to the 1600s. But it has had an interesting history. It was damaged by fire and fell into disrepair for a little while. But obviously it's come back as a real centre, especially since the Parliament is here now, to have those two things so close together, that juxtaposition of monarchy and government after devolution.
And certainly people are gathered here now
They are.
outside the Parliament and the streets. There are stewards everywhere, barricades too, because just in front of us is where the cortege will come down and enter Holyrood.
Through Abbey Strand
Through
Gate.
Abbey Strand,
Abbey Strand
exactly,
Gate, yeah.
through, and will enter Holyrood House. And as you say, the Queen will rest there tonight before making her way to St Giles Cathedral, doing the journey in reverse effectively and travelling up this historic road of the Royal Mile.
It's a very, it's got such a long history, the Royal Mile, part of the old town of Edinburgh, and all those little alleyways and closes, and it's a real haven, or somewhere that tourists flock to, and during festival time, that location is, you can't move, and it's a real centre for celebration as well. It's a real focal point for Edinburgh.
And now the cortege, as you can see, once again, the pavements are packed with people who have been no doubt waiting patiently. This has been a long journey, waiting to get that glimpse. And before we've talked about, it's an almost tranquil moment for them. It feels like a moment of a silence for everybody as they see this cortege pass through.
I think it's that moment to reflect and have the reality dawn. You were asking me earlier about Balmoral, and I can only imagine the emotional anguish that they must have been feeling, and just trying to keep it together to as Ruth Davison said, to do this right. And people, I've often said, people didn't know, and other people have said it too, how strongly they were going to feel when this actually happened. And I think many people were surprised at what they were moved to do, to go and stand at the side of the road as they are now. And when you saw the tractors and you saw everybody on the carriageways stopped to watch, the world, it just felt like everything stands still when that cortege goes past.
Well, King Charles in his national address, drawing on that broadcast from Cape Town that the Queen had made on her 21st birthday back in 1947, whether she promised to devote her life to the Commonwealth, whether it be short or long, and to the services of her peoples. He said then that was more than a promise. It was a profound personal commitment which defined her whole life. She made sacrifices for duty. Did you see that?
I didn't see the sacrifices. I couldn't comment specifically on those. But yes,
she lived it. It was palpable in her that she always at the heart of what she wanted was this meeting people, connecting and making that moment of connection with her easy for so many people in so many different situations, young and old. And she just had a great gift. And what I feel about that is just huge gratitude for that. She was, we'll never see her like it, I'm pretty sure.
Well, he also said in her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition together with that fearless embrace of progress, which make us great as nations. The affection, admiration and respect she inspired became the hallmark of her reign. And today we see that admiration and respect, but we also see the tradition too, which we know the Queen did enjoy.
Yes, and I think that's very, very important to reflect these traditions, and many of them have been seen for the first time, as we saw with the Accession Council yesterday. And it is part of the richness, the pageantry, it's part of culture. And I think I can certainly speak to how Scotland's ceremonial events are slightly different to other parts of the country, but they're all distinct. Each of the 4 nations has a different way of demonstrating their culture and their civic life.
We saw there the High Kirk, as you put it, St Giles Cathedral, and the Queen certainly made regular visits there herself, did she not, as Sovereign of the Order of the Thistle. It is where her coffin will go tomorrow, a procession which will go from the Palace of Holyrood House with her 4 children following on behind, solemnly walking behind her up the Royal Mile.
That's what we will see tomorrow. There will also be a small group of Royal Household staff, I believe, also walking up the Royal Mile. It's a very, St Giles is just, I love St Giles. It's slightly not what one might expect, I guess, for a cathedral. It's Presbyterian, but it does feel a little bit more ornate to me, to my mind, and it's not, it's very, very distinct, the High Kirk.
Well, dates back, what, 800 years or so, and I was speaking to one of the Edinburgh tour guides yesterday, and they were describing that it's had many incarnations as a school and as a prison, and they were telling me that beheadings took place outside. So the history of this place is truly fascinating, certainly, but really a strong part of the Reformation which took place in Scotland. And we heard, did we not, in that Accession Council yesterday, the separation of the Church of Scotland and the Church of England, and that King Charles had to swear the independence of the Church of Scotland, which really feels like it is centred on St Giles Cathedral.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. I think most people would perhaps think of St Giles, and there are other wonderful cathedrals in Glasgow and other cities too. But that is the High Kirk, and it's around there that the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland meets each year. You spoke to Lorna Hood, and for many, many years, until the advent of devolution, it was said that the church was the most democratic institution in Scotland. But it was, I think it was 1707, the Act of Union, that meant that this was one of the conditions, the separation of Church of Scotland and monarchy. And that's demonstrated during Lord High Commissioner's Week, which is the Queen's representative to the General Assembly, when the monarch symbolically sits to the side and out, not in the body of the kirk, to symbolise that distinction.
Yes, and Scotland becoming a Protestant country in 1560, and St Giles is 400 years as a Catholic church coming to an end, the stained glass windows inside removed and all the old church silver melted down and sold to raise money for the redecoration. But more recently, the stained glass window as a mark to the national bard, Rabbi Burns, added to the cathedral in 1985, and possibly that is what we will see tomorrow when the family begin the service there. We know that Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, will now be joining them as well. And then there will be a vigil by the family, and it then will be time for members of the public to also enter the cathedral to pay their respects.
Yes, yes. That will be a very moving thing to witness, the vigil.
Queen Elizabeth II in the centre of the Union flag. the children who've come out to witness history. The streets lined, as we have seen in other cities, that the cortege has made its way through: Aberdeen, Dundee, and here in Edinburgh, Scotland's capital, as she makes her way to her official residence. Her body will rest overnight at the Palace of Holyrood House, and members of her household staff will pay their respects to the monarch for whom many have worked for years. Members of her family already arriving here, leaving Balmoral earlier today. The Duke of York, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, and their daughter arriving by helicopter to the grounds of the palace, taking part in the events of tomorrow, centred on that cathedral we saw on the Royal Mile. King Charles also flying up too, with the Queen Consort, the Prime Minister joining events here in Edinburgh tomorrow. There is almost a wonder, is there not, as people wait? Louise.
There is. That bridge that come across now is the Dean Bridge. Just on the west side of the city.
And the route from there?
I wouldn't like to speculate exactly. There is an understood royal route of coming from the airport and so forth, but this is very close to the centre of town now, very close to the centre of Edinburgh. I think it'll be Princes Street and then up the Mound. And down the
How
Royal
hard
Mile.
is this for you to watch?
It is difficult, and you know, we've seen these pictures, but until we perhaps see this over our shoulders here, we might not. I don't think it's sunk in yet, but you know, it's so grateful that so many people along that route have had the opportunity to see her one last time.
Louise Tate, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's head back to Alistair Bruce, who, as Governor of Edinburgh Castle, knows this area so well. Alistair.
Coming along Queen's Ferry Road, and we're about to cross Dean Bridge and into the new town. And this really is the Queen returning to the heart now of Edinburgh City, the city that she first came to as a crowned queen in 1953, to which she returned almost every year, apart from the period of COVID. And it was to the Palace of Holyrood House that she came at 11 o'clock on the 27th of June this year on her final royal visit to the capital of Scotland. It was quite soon after her Platinum Jubilee celebrations down in London. The nation had noticed how unable she had been to fulfill all the plans that had originally been put together, but she did attend at the beginning and at the end with balcony appearances. And so when she came to Edinburgh on the 27th of June, it was very heartening for those who wished her well to see her get out of the State Bentley, which is currently following her hearse with the Princess Royal inside. And she received the new Lord Provost of Edinburgh. She was accompanied by the Earl and Countess of Wessex and Forfar, who played their part in supporting the Queen's arrival. The Dean Bridge we look down at now, as Her Majesty now crosses Leith Water and comes into the new town. The new town itself was being built and was really an emblem of the revival of so much in Scotland after King George IV had come on his visit in 1822. And it was typical of the Queen that she wanted to mark the 200th anniversary of that visit by King George IV this year. Let's see her cross the bridge. The Queen returning to the city that was the name of the dukedom that King George VI gave her husband when she married him in 1947. And he was Duke of Edinburgh, and she was very proud to be his Duchess of Edinburgh. From Queensferry Road to Queensferry Street, and there, dead ahead, the castle and fortress of Edinburgh Castle and the old town of that great city, the Athens of the North, and the stronghold in that fortress of the symbols of the Scottish nation. The Queen's procession will come down to Princes Street and turn onto Lothian Road. The fortress where earlier today, Lord Lion, King of Arms, gave the second of two proclamations here in Edinburgh, that Elizabeth II is dead and King Charles III is the new king. And there at the top of the Royal Mile, we wait for the Queen's procession to come up and turn towards us. She first of all will skirt around the base of the fortress and come up Johnson Terrace. And only a few weeks ago, this area was athrong with the glories of celebration that is the Edinburgh Festival each year, where a profound quantity of youth, creativity, and arts and culture come into this royal dukedom, the name of which she carried, and bring it to life. And just up the Castle Hill to the right of the church there, which is now known as the Hub, just up to the right there, the Castle Esplanade, where the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo takes place each year. All that seems a long way away, but the crowds fill now this most ancient of royal processional routes. There is no processional route older than the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. And the great tradition in Scotland was not a procession, but a riding. And the lover of equestrian things and horses that the Queen was would probably have seen some delight in her final journey down from the Highlands, ending up passing along where the great ridings of Scottish tradition, right back to when Mary, Queen of Scots, moved through this ancient city, being shouted at by John Knox. Always there is controversy in a vibrant city, and that is also true today. There's a hush in the crowd. Police Scotland holding the ground. A long journey for those in accompanying roles, particularly for the Princess Royal and Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence, who's kept his wife company on the journey from Balmoral. It's now 6 hours and 10 minutes since the Queen came out of Balmoral, leaving the clutches of her favourite home to make this journey to her royal palace here in Edinburgh. And the Queen makes her journey come to an end with this route down the Royal Mile. The Queen passes the High Kirk of St. Giles, where tomorrow she will lie in state, and also the Mercat Cross, where in 1952 her father, the King's death, was announced and the start of her reign to her proclamation. And today we saw the proclamation of her son, the new King. The cobbled street of this Royal Mile, which will turn into the Canongate shortly, will bring the Queen to the Abbey Strand Gate into the forecourt of Holyrood Palace. Waiting for the late Queen there will be the The Guard of Honour, provided by the Royal Regiment of Scotland, and the King's colour will be lowered in salute to the late Queen. No band will play. And when the hearse comes to a halt, the officer commanding the bearer party will move forward, and Her late Majesty will be lifted from the hearse and borne into the palace along the colonnade inside the courtyard, and then up to the great stair, and the coffin placed in the throne room of a palace that she left only at the end of June earlier this year. Looking up from the start of Abbey Strand Gate, up the hill, awaiting the Queen, being brought down past the Canongate Kirk, where, when she was in Edinburgh, she regularly again attended divine service, and where her granddaughter, Zara Phillips, was married. It is so difficult to believe that the sparkly-eyed, happy, enthusiastic, courteous Queen who came on that morning of the 27th of June this year to the very place where she will halt today is returned in this particular manner so soon. But Scotland has welcomed her home. She's passed through this long and interesting journey through the Highlands, and finally, we see her come home to her palace here beside the Parliament building that was built in her reign, to be received and to rest in private overnight. The bearer party for their Colonel-in-Chief from the Royal Regiment of Scotland prepare to lift their precious burden and carry Her late Majesty into the palace. After more than 70 years as Queen of Scots, Elizabeth II is taken into the palace and will be placed in the throne room, peacefully at rest overnight, before the ceremonies begin tomorrow, and she's taken to the High Kirk of St. Giles, where a service of thanksgiving for her life of service to Scotland will take place in the presence of His Majesty the King. The Queen is home.
God of order will advance. Right, turn.
The Guard of Honour with the King's colour taking leave of this sad sight here at Holyrood. So different from when the Queen arrived, and many of these soldiers gave their own salute to the arrival of their Queen. But today they've shown their ultimate respect on the instructions of the new King to the late Queen as they now leave out towards Arthur's Seat and the glorious views that this great palace has of the hills that sit right within the heart of the city. As Scotland has brought home the late Queen from the Highlands here to the heart of Edinburgh. And tomorrow, these soldiers will return. They will take their part in escorting the late Queen to the cathedral on the Royal Mile. And following the procession will be His Majesty the King and other members of the royal family. The constables of Holyrood taking their leave also from this scene. And with the courtyard once again empty and the sentry marching out his pace. This sad journey is at an end, and the Queen is at rest in Holyrood.